What if I told you that every addiction you've ever struggled with, whether it's substances, validation, perfectionism, or even the endless scroll of social media, is not your weakness, but your psyche's desperate attempt to return home to itself? What if the very thing you've been fighting against is actually a messenger, carrying within it the key to your deepest healing and most profound transformation? If you're ready to discover what Carl Jung knew about the hidden psychology of addiction and how understanding your shadow can set you free forever, then hit that like button, subscribe for more life-changing content, and stay with me until the very end. Because by the time this video concludes, you won't just understand addiction differently, you'll become a different person entirely. There's a pain that lives in the quiet spaces between your breaths. A restlessness that no amount of achievement, consumption, or distraction can truly silence. You know this pain intimately. It's the hollow ache that drives you toward that drink, that substance, that compulsive behavior, that endless seeking for something outside yourself to make the internal storm finally stop. But here's what Carl Jung discovered in his decades of exploring the human psyche. Addiction is never really about the substance or the behavior. It's about a soul in exile from itself. Jung once wrote, "Every form of addiction is bad, no matter whether the narcotic be alcohol, morphine, or idealism." Notice that word, idealism. Even our highest pursuits can become prisons when they serve to avoid the fundamental task of becoming who we truly are. You see, beneath every addictive pattern lies what Jung called the unlived life, the authentic self that you've abandoned in favor of who you think you should be, who others expect you to be, who society demands you to be. The addiction becomes a twisted form of self-medication, numbing the pain of this profound self-betrayal. Think about it. When did you first learn to disconnect from your true desires, your genuine feelings, your authentic responses to the world? When did you first discover that it was safer to wear a mask than to show your real face? That moment of choosing safety over truth is where the seeds of all future addictions were planted. The child who learned that anger was unacceptable becomes the adult who medicates with alcohol. The teenager who discovered that vulnerability was dangerous becomes the adult addicted to control, to work, to the illusion of invulnerability. The young person who was taught that their needs didn't matter becomes the adult lost in codependent relationships, addicted to being needed by others while never learning to need themselves. Jung understood that addiction is the psyche's way of crying out, "I am not living my own life." It's a rebellion against the false self, even as it strengthens the false self's grip. It's the shadow, everything you've rejected about yourself, demanding to be acknowledged, integrated, made whole. But here's where the real tragedy lies. We've been taught to see addiction as a moral failing, a lack of willpower, a character defect. This couldn't be further from the truth. Addiction is often the mark of a sensitive soul trying to survive in a world that demands conformity. It's the badge of someone who feels too much, cares too deeply, but has never learned how to honor these gifts without drowning in them. Your addiction is not your enemy. It's your psyche's clumsy but desperate attempt to guide you back to yourself. The question is, are you ready to listen to what it's really trying to tell you? From the moment you drew your first breath, you entered what Jung called the collective unconscious, a vast web of inherited patterns, social expectations, and cultural conditioning that began shaping you before you could even speak your own name. You were taught to be good, to be productive, to be acceptable, to fit in, to succeed according to metrics that had nothing to do with your soul's true calling. You learned to fragment yourself, to put your wildness in one box, your gentleness in another, your darkness in the deepest vault, and to present only the sanitized, approved version of who you are to the world. This process, which Jung called the development of the persona, the mask we wear in social situations, is necessary for survival. But somewhere along the way, you forgot that it was just a mask. You began to believe that this edited, compressed, socially acceptable version of yourself was the real you. And in that moment of forgetting, the ground was prepared for addiction to take root. Because when you reject parts of yourself, they don't disappear. They go underground. They form what Jung called the shadow, the repository of all the aspects of yourself that you've deemed unacceptable, dangerous, or inconvenient. And the shadow, like a river dammed, will always find a way to flow. This is where addiction enters the picture. It becomes the shadow's outlet, its voice, its desperate attempt to be acknowledged. The perfectionist who drinks to access their spontaneity. The people pleaser who uses drugs to finally say no. The overachiever who gambles to taste the chaos they've banished from their controlled existence. Modern society has perfected the art of creating addictive patterns. We live in what philosopher Byung-Chul Han calls the burnout society, a culture that promises that if you just consume enough, achieve enough, optimize enough, you'll finally feel complete. But completion cannot come from addition. It can only come from integration. Think about the messages you absorbed growing up. Don't be too much. Control yourself. Your feelings are too intense. Just think positive. Work harder. You're being too sensitive. Each of these well-meaning but damaging messages created a split in your psyche. A rejection of some essential part of your nature that then had to find underground expression. Jung observed that what you resist persists. The parts of yourself that you've pushed into the shadow don't become smaller or weaker. They become more primitive, more compulsive, more likely to emerge in destructive ways. The anger you've never allowed yourself to feel becomes passive aggression or explosive rage. The vulnerability you've never permitted becomes neediness or codependence. The power you've never owned becomes manipulation or self-destruction. And here's the cruel irony. The very traits that make you most susceptible to addiction, your sensitivity, your depth of feeling, your ability to perceive what others miss, these are also your greatest gifts. But in a culture that values numbness over feeling, productivity over presence, and conformity over authenticity, these gifts can feel like curses. The solution is not to perfect the mask, to strengthen the persona, to become even better at rejecting parts of yourself. The solution is to begin the process that Jung called individuation, the courageous journey of becoming who you actually are, not who you think you should be. But this journey requires something that our achievement-obsessed, externally focused culture rarely teaches us. The willingness to go within, to face the shadow, to sit with the discomfort of not knowing, and to trust that in the darkness of your own depths, you will find not monsters, but the very light you've been seeking outside yourself all along. There comes a moment in every soul's journey when the noise of the world becomes unbearable, when the constant performance becomes exhausting, when something deep inside you whispers, "Stop, turn around, go within." This is not a breakdown. This is a breakthrough waiting to happen. Jung himself experienced what he called his confrontation with the unconscious, a period of intense inner turmoil and withdrawal from external activities that many around him feared was a psychological collapse. But Jung understood something profound. Sometimes what looks like falling apart is actually falling together. Sometimes retreat is not escape. It's the most courageous act of all. In our hyper-connected, always-on world, the idea of withdrawal, of becoming consciously unavailable, has become almost revolutionary. We've been conditioned to believe that more connection, more stimulation, more activity equals more life. But Jung knew differently. He knew that without the inward journey, the outward life becomes hollow, compulsive, addictive. Your visions become clear when you can look into your own heart. Jung wrote, "Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakens." This is why every wisdom tradition speaks of the importance of solitude, of wilderness time, of periods of intentional separation from the collective dream. Not because connection and community aren't important, but because without a deep, authentic relationship with yourself, all other relationships become performances, projections, or desperate attempts to fill the void that only self-knowledge can fill. If you're struggling with addiction, chances are you've lost touch with the art of being alone with yourself without needing to escape, medicate, or distract. You've forgotten how to sit in the silence and find it nourishing rather than threatening. You've become afraid of your own depths because you've been taught to fear what you might find there. But here's what Jung discovered in his own descent into the underworld of the psyche. The monsters in the depths are not your enemies. They are your unlived life, your rejected gifts, your abandoned dreams, your disowned power. They are the very energies that, when consciously integrated, become your greatest sources of strength, creativity, and authentic joy. This is why the path out of addiction cannot be found in more external solutions, more behavioral modifications, more white-knuckling your way through cravings. The path lies in developing what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold the tension between opposites within yourself without immediately acting to resolve that tension through external means. When you feel the urge to drink, to use, to act out in whatever way your addiction manifests, can you pause? Can you breathe? Can you ask, what is this feeling trying to tell me? What part of me is crying out for attention, for integration, for love? This is not about suppressing the urge or judging it as wrong. This is about becoming curious about it, dialoguing with it, discovering what legitimate need or unlived aspect of yourself it represents. The addict's relationship with their substance or behavior is often the most honest relationship they have. It's the one place where they allow themselves to feel deeply, to be vulnerable, to experience intensity. The tragedy is not the intensity itself, but that this intensity has been channeled into something ultimately destructive rather than creative and life-giving. Withdrawal, conscious, intentional withdrawal, gives you the space to redirect this energy, to discover that the intensity you've been medicating can become the fuel for the most meaningful life you've ever lived. To learn that the sensitivity that makes you vulnerable to addiction also makes you capable of profound empathy, artistic expression, and spiritual insight. In the silence, away from the demands and expectations of others, you begin to hear the voice of your authentic self, not the shoulds and musts and have-tos, but the deep, quiet knowing of what truly brings you alive. And in that hearing, the compulsive seeking outside yourself begins to quiet, because you've finally found what you were looking for all along: yourself. Jung spent his life studying alchemy, not because he believed in turning lead into gold, but because he recognized in these ancient texts a profound map of psychological transformation. The alchemists understood something that modern psychology often misses. True change doesn't happen by eliminating the darkness, but by transforming it into light. This is the secret that can free you from addiction forever. Your struggles are not obstacles to overcome, but raw materials for your transformation. In alchemical terms, addiction represents what was called prima materia, the base material that contains within it the potential for gold, but in its current state appears to be nothing but chaos, pain, and confusion. The alchemist's task was not to throw away this base material, but to subject it to the sacred processes of transformation. Jung identified these processes in psychological terms. First comes what he called nigredo, the dark night of the soul, the descent into the shadow, the honest acknowledgement of what is. You cannot transform what you will not face. This is why so many approaches to addiction fail. They try to skip over the darkness rather than learning from it. When you finally stop running from your addiction and instead begin to study it with the curiosity of a scientist and the compassion of a loving parent, something remarkable happens. You begin to see patterns. You begin to understand the wounded child within who learned that love was conditional, safety was temporary, and authenticity was dangerous. You begin to recognize what Jung called complexes, autonomous clusters of psychic energy that operate like sub-personalities within you. The angry part that drinks to feel powerful, the scared part that uses substances to feel safe, the lonely part that seeks connection through destructive behaviors. These aren't character flaws to be eliminated. They're aspects of your psyche that need to be acknowledged, understood, and consciously integrated. This brings us to the second phase of alchemical transformation. Albedo, the whitening, the clarification, the beginning of discrimination. You start to differentiate between the healthy core of these energies and their destructive expressions. You realize that the anger is actually healthy boundary-setting energy that has been corrupted by fear. The fear is actually healthy caution that has become paralyzing anxiety. The loneliness is actually a healthy need for authentic connection that has become desperate codependence. Jung taught that every neurosis, every addiction, every compulsive pattern contains within it an attempt at self-healing. Your psyche is always trying to move toward wholeness, toward what he called individuation. But without consciousness, these healing attempts become symptoms. The third phase of transformation is rubedo, the reddening, the integration, the birth of the new self. This is where the lead truly becomes gold. This is where your former addiction becomes your greatest source of wisdom, compassion, and strength. Think of the recovering addict who becomes a counselor, not in spite of their past, but because of it. Think of the person who transforms their addictive intensity into artistic creation, spiritual practice, or passionate service to others. This is not sublimation. It's alchemy. It's the recognition that the very energy that once destroyed you can, when properly channeled and consciously integrated, become the force that creates your most meaningful life. But here's the crucial point that Jung emphasized. This transformation cannot be forced. It cannot be hurried. It requires what he called holding the tension of the opposites, living with the discomfort of change without immediately acting to resolve it through your old patterns. This is perhaps the most difficult skill for the addictive personality to develop. The ability to sit with intensity without immediately discharging it, to feel the anxiety without reaching for the substance, to experience the loneliness without compulsively seeking connection, to touch the anger without exploding or imploding. In this space of conscious tension, something new is born. Jung called it the transcendent function, a new way of being that transcends the old, either-or patterns of addiction and recovery, shadow and persona, weakness and strength. You discover that you are large enough to contain all of it, wise enough to transform all of it, and powerful enough to choose how to express all of it. After the descent, after the alchemy, comes what Jung called the return, not to who you were before, but to who you were always meant to become. This is not recovery, this is discovery. This is not getting your life back, this is finally beginning to live your life. The person who emerges from the depths of addiction's shadow is not diminished but expanded. They carry within them the wisdom of both light and darkness, the strength that comes only from having descended into hell and chosen to find heaven there. They have learned what Nietzsche meant when he wrote, "What does not kill me makes me stronger," not because they've simply survived, but because they've transformed. But here's where many people get lost in their journey beyond addiction. They think the goal is to become invulnerable, to build walls so high that they never feel the intensity that once drove them to substance or compulsive behavior. This is not healing. This is merely a more sophisticated form of numbing. The truly recovered person, the individuated person in Jung's terms, is not someone who no longer feels deeply. They are someone who has learned to feel deeply without being destroyed by it. They have developed what Jung called Emotional differentiation. The ability to experience intense emotions without being overwhelmed by them or compulsively acting them out. This person has made peace with their shadow. They no longer project their disowned darkness onto others or medicate it away. They recognize the early warning signs when old patterns begin to emerge, and they have developed healthy rituals and practices for integration rather than suppression. Most importantly, they have learned to love and accept the very aspects of themselves that once seemed like liabilities. Their sensitivity becomes a gift of deep empathy. Their intensity becomes passion for meaningful work. Their capacity for altered states becomes a doorway to creativity, spirituality, and transcendent experience. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." For the person emerging from addiction, this is not just poetic language, it's the literal truth of their journey. They have been stripped down to essence, forced to confront the difference between who they really are and who they thought they should be, and given the opportunity to choose authenticity over acceptability. But this choice must be made again and again, moment by moment, day by day. The path of individuation is not a destination but a way of traveling. It requires constant vigilance, not the white-knuckled vigilance of fighting against something, but the loving vigilance of a parent watching over a child. The gentle attention of a gardener tending to something precious and growing. This is why the question at the heart of addiction recovery is not, how do I stop using, but how do I start living? How do I create a life so aligned with my authentic self that the old patterns of escape and medication become not just unnecessary, but unthinkable? The answer lies in what Jung called active imagination, the conscious creative engagement with your inner life. It lies in developing practices that feed your soul rather than deplete it. It lies in surrounding yourself with people who see and celebrate your authentic self rather than requiring you to perform your persona. It lies in work that expresses your unique gifts rather than just paying the bills. It lies in relationships based on genuine intimacy rather than codependent need. But most of all, it lies in the daily choice to face yourself with curiosity rather than judgment, with compassion rather than criticism, with love rather than fear. Because the person who can love themselves completely, shadow and light, mistakes and triumphs, human frailties and divine potentials, that person has found the only antidote to addiction that truly works. A life worth living consciously. As Jung himself discovered in his own dark night of the soul, your visions become clear when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakens. The dream of finding completion outside yourself is over. The awakening of finding wholeness within yourself has begun. Now comes the most challenging and most rewarding part of the journey, learning to live as an integrated human being in a world that still encourages fragmentation, still pushes for the quick fix, still whispers that you're not enough as you are. Integration is not a one-time achievement, it's a lifelong practice. Jung understood that individuation is not about reaching some perfect state of psychological health, but about developing an ongoing conscious relationship with all aspects of yourself, including the aspects that once drove you toward addiction. This means learning to dance with your triggers rather than being danced by them. When the old anxiety arises, instead of immediately reaching for your substance or behavior of choice, you pause, you breathe. You ask, what is this feeling trying to protect me from? What does it need? How can I respond to it with wisdom rather than reactivity? This means developing what Jung called psychological literacy, the ability to read the subtle language of your psyche, to recognize when you're operating from your authentic self versus when you're being hijacked by unconscious patterns or societal programming. But perhaps most importantly, integration means learning to hold paradox. You are both strong and vulnerable. You are both healing and wounded. You are both human and divine. You are both individual and connected to the whole. The addictive mind wants to collapse these paradoxes into simple either-or answers, but the integrated mind learns to live creatively within the both-and of human existence. This is why Jung emphasized the importance of what he called the middle way, not the extremes of complete indulgence or rigid abstinence, but the conscious moment-by-moment choice of what serves your highest good while honoring your human complexity. For some, this might mean complete abstinence from their substance of choice, not as a punishment, but as a recognition that their particular biochemistry and psychology function best with clear boundaries. For others, it might mean developing a completely transformed relationship with potentially addictive behaviors, approaching them consciously, mindfully, as part of a rich, integrated life rather than as escape mechanisms. There is no one-size-fits-all answer because there is no one-size-fits-all human being. This is the beauty and the terror of individuation. You must become your own authority, your own guide, your own wise parent. You must develop the capacity to listen to your deepest wisdom rather than the loudest voice, whether that voice comes from addiction, society, or well-meaning others who cannot live your unique life for you. But you are not alone in this journey. Jung spoke of the collective unconscious, the deep layer of psyche that connects all human beings. Your healing contributes to the healing of the whole. Your choice to live authentically gives others permission to do the same. Your willingness to integrate your shadow rather than project it outward helps heal the collective shadow that manifests as addiction, violence, and unconscious suffering in our world. This is the ultimate gift of your journey through and beyond addiction. You become not just a healed individual, but a healing presence in the world. You become someone who can sit with others in their darkness without trying to fix them or flee from them. You become someone who can offer hope without false promises, wisdom without preaching, love without conditions. As you continue on this path of integration, remember Jung's words. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Your addiction was once your greatest source of shame. Now it can become your deepest source of wisdom and compassion. The journey that began with the desperate attempt to escape yourself has led you home to yourself. The energy that once drove you toward destruction now fuels your creation. The sensitivity that once felt like a curse now reveals itself as your superpower. You are not recovering from addiction, you are discovering your authentic self. You are not fighting against your nature, you are finally learning to dance with it. You are not broken and being fixed, you are whole and learning to live from that wholeness. This is what Jung meant by individuation. This is what it means to become who you truly are. This is how you ensure that addiction will never win again, not because you've built impenetrable walls against it, but because you've built such a beautiful, authentic, meaningful life that the old patterns of escape lose their appeal. Take a deep breath. Feel your feet on the ground. Feel your heart beating in your chest. You are here. You are alive. You are conscious. You are on the path of becoming fully, authentically, unapologetically yourself. And that, my friend, is the greatest victory of all.